He remembered the silence first. Not the impact, not the pressure of ferrocrete against his sarcophagus, not the sound of armor plates cooling under ashfall. The silence came after all of it, when the battlefield had moved on without him, and left only the slow pulse of his reactor for company. Brother Bakken would later describe the experience without anger. He did not speak of abandonment as betrayal. He did not frame survival as victory. To him, those were lesser interpretations placed upon greater duties by those who still measured war through fear, fatigue, and uncertainty. He had known darkness before. Every warrior interred within a dreadnought learned to exist between waking and suspension, between memory and machine response. But the darkness beneath the convoy wreckage had weight. It pressed against his chassis through broken road plates and crushed vehicle frames. It turned the world into pressure readings, heat warnings, and distant tremors passing through the ground. For several days, Brother Bakken did not know whether the Imperial line still existed. He only knew that he remained capable of movement, and that capability carried obligation. Before his internment, he had been Bakken of Nocturne, a battle brother of the Salamanders chapter, sworn to the defense of mankind under the teachings of Vulcan. His exact age had become difficult to define after interment. His organic remains had survived beyond the ordinary span of even an Adeptus Astartes, sustained within the life support systems of a Kastorel pattern Dreadnought sarcophagus. His original service record placed him among the fire-born warriors of the 18th Legion's lineage, shaped by the gravity, heat, and discipline of Nocturne long before his body failed and his service changed form. Within the chapter, he had not been remembered as the fastest blade or the loudest voice. He had been known for endurance, restraint, and a habit of remaining near the weakest point in a defensive line. That habit had outlived his flesh. His role after internment was not limited to heavy assault. He was a walking relic, a veteran advisor, a siege breaker, and a guardian asset assigned when ordinary infantry required a center that would not break. His chassis stood over 3 meters in height, with mass sufficient to buckle damaged roadway under each step. The armor casing bore the deep green of the salamanders, darkened beneath ash and heat scoring. The left side of the sarcophagus housing carried older flame markings, partially burned away by weapons discharge during previous campaigns. His chapter icon remained visible across the front plate, though the surface had been cracked by the collapse that buried him. Around the sarcophagus frame, the machine spirit responded with stubborn reliability, even after repeated trauma to its motive systems. Brother Bakken's right arm mounted a heavy flamer assembly adapted for close-range area denial, though its fuel pressure had degraded after the destruction of the convoy. His left arm carried a dreadnought close combat weapon with an underslung storm bolter, its feed mechanism damaged but functional. The weapon configuration reflected Salamander's doctrine clearly. He was built to hold ground, clear entrenched positions, protect advancing infantry, and punish any enemy that attempted to close with the vulnerable. Inside the armored shell, little remained of the warrior as ordinary humans understood the body. What survived was preserved within the sarcophagus core: neural tissue, partial organic systems, memory, will, and the spiritual burden of continued service. The machine did not erase Barkan. It extended him. It gave his oath metal, hydraulics, armor, and weapons sufficient to carry that oath into battles where flesh alone would have ended. His rank was not treated in the same manner as a line officer. Among the Salamanders, a Venerable Dreadnought carried authority through age, experience, and sacred continuity. Brother Barkan was addressed with reverence by serfs, tech marines, and battle brothers, but he did not command through distance. His counsel was tactical, but his presence was personal. He had fought beside generations of warriors who had been born long after his internment. Some had died under his protection. Others had risen to command, while still recalling the first time they heard his voice through a Vox grill, slow and low, carrying the weight of a man who had seen fire consume cities and still believed they could be saved. During the opening phase of the Frontier campaign, his assigned role had been direct protection of a mechanized Imperial relief convoy moving toward a forward defense network beyond the hive approaches. The convoy carried munitions, field medical stores, replacement Vox components, portable generators, and Promethium reserves intended for an outpost already operating beyond safe logistical range. Brother Barkan had been placed near the central column, where his armor could respond either forward or rearward, depending on the direction of contact. He had understood the weakness of the deployment before the first major strike came. The road system was exposed. The surrounding industrial districts were too damaged for clean armor maneuver. The ash density interfered with line of sight, and the convoy's escort strength was adequate only if the enemy remained scattered. Against disciplined traitor forces, the formation would require orbital overwatch or rapid reinforcement. Neither remained available by the time Barkan woke beneath the wreckage. The first confirmed signal he received after regaining full consciousness was not a voice. It was a structural warning from his own chassis. His left hip actuator had suffered compression damage. His rear armor plating had been partially fused with external debris. Internal temperature was above safe tolerance, though not yet critical. Ammunition counters flickered with inconsistent readings. The sarcophagus core remained stable. He tested movement slowly. One arm shifted. Metal scraped against metal. A collapsed slab resisted, then fractured. The sound moved outward through the buried hollow around him. He paused, not from fear, but from assessment. If enemy forces remained nearby, careless movement would reveal him before he could understand the terrain. If loyal survivors were present, sudden weapons discharge could harm them. That thought defined the first decision of his return. He did not emerge firing. He forced his way upward with controlled pressure, using the close combat arm to break the wreckage in sections. The process was slow. His damaged leg responded with delayed force, causing uneven load transfer through the chassis. Several times, the machine spirit returned correction warnings. Several times he ignored them. Duty did not require perfection. It required continuation. When the final layer of debris shifted and ash poured across his hull, Brother Barkan saw the frontier road again through damaged optics. The sky above was a low ceiling of smoke and chemical cloud. Fires burned without urgency across the remains of transport vehicles. The convoy route had become a scar of blackened metal and ruptured ferrocrete. No active Imperial command beacon answered his identification pulse. He transmitted his designation across the local vox. "This is Brother Bakken of the Salamanders. Respond if loyal forces remain." Only static returned. He repeated the transmission on 3 channels, then on a degraded emergency band used by Astra Militarum units when primary command links failed. The result did not change. He stood in the wreckage while ash moved across his armor in thin sheets. The battlefield offered no confirmation that his chapter still held the region, that the outpost remained intact, or that any human voice would answer him within the next 80 kilometers. His tactical systems began assembling what little could be confirmed. The convoy had been destroyed. Enemy movement had passed through the area after the strike. Orbital support was absent. Vox relay infrastructure was either destroyed or suppressed. The nearest known Imperial position remained distant, and the route between his current location and that position crossed territory no longer under reliable Imperial control. Brother Bakken did not record hesitation. He turned toward the last known bearing of the outpost and began walking. The relief convoy had not been assembled as a strike force. Brother Bakken understood that distinction from the moment he reviewed its deployment order. It was a support movement placed under combat escort because the front had degraded faster than command projections allowed. Its purpose was not to reclaim territory, pursue the enemy, or establish a new line of advance. Its purpose was to keep an existing Imperial position alive long enough for higher command to decide whether the sector could still be held. The outpost was designated Kastorel Gate, though the title gave it more importance than its structure deserved. It had begun as a reinforced transit hub built along the outer industrial approaches of a hive province, where cargo lines, labor routes, and military supply roads intersected before descending toward the deeper manufactorum districts. When the war reached the frontier belt, Kastorel Gate became a forward anchor for retreating Imperial units. Its walls were not designed for prolonged siege, but they were thick enough to stop small arms and most light artillery. Its Auspex tower still had partial range over the eastern ash flats. Its underground storehouses could shelter wounded personnel and civilian labor detachments if the surface came under bombardment. By the time the convoy was ordered forward, Kastorel Gate had already reported power shortages, water filtration failure, reduced medici capacity, and ammunition expenditure above sustainable levels. Its garrison had taken in survivors from collapsed trench lines and scattered worker militias. The last formal report estimated several thousand loyal personnel inside the perimeter, but Brother Bakken considered the figure unreliable. Reports from a collapsing front often counted the living, the wounded, the missing, and the already dead with equal uncertainty. The convoy assigned to reinforce the outpost carried what command believed could be spared without weakening the rear line. It included Munitorum cargo haulers, armored fuel carriers, recovery tractors, field ambulances, and several infantry carriers modified for casualty transport. The cargo manifest listed promethium reserves for heating and weapon fuel, generator cores for emergency power, replacement Vox components, laser gun charge packs, autocannon belts, ration blocks, water purification cartridges, and surgical supplies. There were also sealed ammunition crates marked for restricted distribution, though Brother Barkan had not been given a full inventory of those contents. He did not question the omission. In Imperial logistics, secrecy often traveled beside desperation. His immediate escort group had been drawn from several units rather than one unified formation. That made discipline more difficult, but not impossible. The primary infantry screen came from the Harakon 73rd Line Breakers, a regiment reduced from its original strength after weeks of defensive action around the manufactorum causeways. They were void-born by culture, pale-skinned and narrow-faced, from generations of shipboard and station-bound service before their tithe to the Astra Militarum. Many wore pressure-adapted underlayers beneath flak armor that had been patched too often. Their officers maintained strict fire lanes, efficient movement intervals, and a preference for silent hand signals when Vox discipline was required. The Harakon commander assigned to the convoy was Captain Maelys Thorne, a woman in her early 40s by standard Terran reckoning, with close-cropped black hair, dark eyes, and a burn scar that ran from the left side of her jaw down into the collar of her armor. She was not physically imposing beside an Adeptus Astartes war machine, but she held authority without wasting speech. Brother Barkan assessed her as practical, observant, and unlikely to abandon her position unless ordered by someone she still respected. Her role was convoy infantry control. She placed squads along the cargo line, protected the medici vehicles, and kept the wounded from slowing the road column beyond operational tolerance. Armor support came from remnants of the Ventrilian 4th Armored Lancers, though only 2 Lehman Russ battle tanks and 1 damaged Chimera command carrier remained attached by the time of departure. The tanks were old, soot-stained, and heavily repaired, each bearing mismatched replacement plating from manufactorum stockpiles. Their crews had not been reckless. They conserved ammunition, advanced in controlled intervals, and rotated engine strain whenever the road surface deteriorated. Brother Barkan respected the discipline. A tank crew that survived in retreat often learned more about war than one that advanced under banners. The convoy also carried technical personnel from the Adeptus Mechanicus and attached Munitorum adepts responsible for the generator cores, spare parts, fuel handling, and machine rights. Magos Auxilia Orvan Krail served as the senior technical authority, though his rank was more functional than ceremonial. He moved with a compact group of engineers, servitors, and red-robed attendants, who never strayed far from the recovery vehicles. His visible augmetics included a lens cluster over the right eye, a reinforced spinal brace, and 2 utility mechadendrites fitted for data connection and field repair. Brother Bacon did not find him warm, but warmth was not required. Krail understood engines, armor stress, and the value of bringing damaged war assets back into service before the enemy reached them. There were also civilians within the convoy, though they were not listed as passengers in the first version of the order. They were manufactorum specialists, water reclamation workers, and power grid technicians taken from rear staging areas because Kastorel Gate could not be stabilized by soldiers alone. Their presence changed the convoy's moral weight. Ammunition could be replaced. Fuel could be requisitioned. A trained filtration engineer, under those conditions, could decide whether 1,000 wounded guardsmen lived 3 more days or died with full canteens stacked uselessly beside broken pumps. Brother Bakken had been assigned as the heaviest individual asset in the escort formation. His role was written in simple terms. He would remain near the convoy center during movement, respond to breakthrough threats, provide armored counter-assault capability, and protect the technical vehicles if the column came under close attack. If the convoy reached Kastorel Gate intact, he was to remain at the outpost until relieved by Salamander's command elements, or until the position stabilized enough for withdrawal. The briefing had been conducted inside a partially buried command chamber behind the rear line, under dim lumen strips and a ceiling that shook each time distant artillery struck the industrial belt. Brother Bakken had stood in the loading bay outside the chamber, too large to enter the room itself. His Vox connection carried every voice clearly enough. Captain Thorne spoke first, identifying the convoy strength, estimated travel duration, and failure points along the route. Orvan Krail followed with an assessment of mechanical risk. He warned that ash intrusion would degrade filters within 6 hours unless the vehicles maintained proper spacing. He also warned that the Western Service Road was unstable after bombardment and could not support the entire convoy if the primary route became blocked. A Munitorum officer named Procurator Halvan Rusk presented the formal order. His voice had been precise, dry, and strained beneath the effort of pretending the situation remained under control. The route to Kastorel Gate measured nearly 80 kilometers from the staging depot. Under normal surface conditions, the convoy could have covered it in less than half a day. Under current conditions, with ashfall, crater damage, refugee obstruction, and enemy artillery risk, the projection extended beyond 20 hours. That estimate assumed no major delays and no close pursuit. Brother Bakken recorded the estimate and judged it optimistic. The enemy was identified as Blood Pact, supported by traitor artillery cells, infiltrators, and mechanized raiding elements. The name changed the quality of the briefing. Ordinary cultists could be scattered by shock, flame, and armor. The Blood Pact were not ordinary cultists. They were disciplined soldiers sworn to the powers of chaos, trained to operate with coordination, patience, and loyalty to their own brutal command structure. Their presence meant ambushes would be prepared, prisoners would be used for deception, and Imperial command patterns would be studied before attack. The convoy's mission order remained unchanged despite that assessment. Kastorel Gate could not hold without reinforcement. If the outpost fell before evacuation corridors were reopened, the entire eastern civilian withdrawal would collapse into enemy territory. Brother Bakken understood the true meaning behind the formal language. The convoy was being sent because failure had already begun elsewhere. The relief column was not part of a broad success. It was a hand reaching into a closing door. Before departure, Captain Thorne requested permission to leave behind the civilians and non-essential personnel. The answer was denied. Kastorel Gate needed them. Without technical restoration, the outpost would become a tomb with walls. Thorne accepted the order without visible protest, though her silence afterward carried more judgment than argument would have. Brother Bakken addressed the convoy through the command channel before the engines started. He did not offer inspiration. He did not promise survival. He stated that the road would be contested, that discipline would matter more than courage, and that every vehicle lost would reduce the outpost's chance of endurance. He instructed the infantry to maintain spacing from his chassis during close contact, because his flame awash and close combat movements would create lethal danger zones. He instructed the drivers not to halt unless ordered by convoy command or blocked by wreckage. He instructed the wounded who could still hold weapons to keep them ready. Then he added one final directive. No loyal soul is to be abandoned while recovery remains possible. The channel stayed silent for several seconds after he spoke. Brother Bakken did not know how many heard the statement as doctrine, comfort, or burden. To him, it was not a flourish. It was operational truth shaped by chapter creed. A convoy existed to deliver material, but the Imperium was not defended by material alone. It was defended by the refusal to treat human lives as already spent before the enemy had finished killing them. When the convoy began moving, Brother Bakken walked beside the central vehicles with his damaged but reliable stride. Ash rolled over the road in low sheets. Engines growled beneath clogged filters. Infantry boots struck ferrocrete in uneven rhythm. Behind them, the rear line faded into smoke. Ahead, the route to Kastorel Gate disappeared into industrial ruin and enemy-held silence. The planetary deployment began under conditions that had already passed beyond stability. Brother Bakken did not descend through the atmosphere with the first wave. He was not deployed for conquest, beachhead seizure, or the opening violence of compliance. By the time his sarcophagus was awakened for full operational readiness, the Imperial war effort on the Ash frontier had entered its corrective phase. That was the language used by command authorities when they wished to avoid the word retreat. Lines had bent, supply roads had narrowed, and the outer settlements feeding the hive belt had become contested ground. The world itself had not fallen, but several of its surface regions had begun to behave as though Imperial ownership was a memory rather than a fact. The planet was an industrial world bound to a hive network, with dense population centers supported by outer refineries, manufactorum belts, transit districts, and worker habitats spread across contaminated plains. Its atmosphere carried suspended ash from centuries of production and recent weeks of bombardment. During clear intervals, the sky appeared yellow-gray over the hive approaches. During active shelling, daylight became a weaker form of darkness. The air carried the taste of metal through even sealed filtration systems. For unaugmented humans, every breath outside a proper mask became labor. For Brother Bakken, the environment registered as particulate density, thermal bloom, corrosive residue, and the constant minor abrasion of ash against armor plate. He was deployed from orbit inside a reinforced landing cradle intended for ancient war assets. The descent craft carried him with ammunition stores, tech marine attendants, and several supply pallets marked for chapter use. The craft entered through cloud layers stained by smoke columns rising from multiple battle zones. Auspex returns showed broken traffic corridors, heat signatures from burning fuel depots, and scattered artillery flashes near the outer industrial regions. Enemy air presence was limited during descent, though not absent. Several flak bursts detonated below the craft as it crossed into the designated landing corridor. None came close enough to alter the descent path. The landing zone had once been a cargo receiving field attached to a manufactorum district. its original surface markings remained visible beneath ash and blast scoring. By the time Brother Barkan's cradle opened, the field had become a staging depot filled with temporary repair shelters, ammunition stacks, medikit tents, fuel bladders, and idling vehicles. The sound was not a single battlefield roar. It was a layered industrial pressure made of engines, distant guns, vox traffic, coughing soldiers, servo arm movement, and the repeated clatter of supply crates dragged across metal decking. His first impression of the deployment zone was inefficiency under strain. Not incompetence, strain. The difference mattered. The personnel present were working, but they were working inside a system that had already lost too many margins. Fuel was being issued under armed supervision. Medici orderlies were triaging patients near vehicle lanes because the tents had overflowed. Engine seers were repairing transports without enough proper replacement parts. Munitorum clerks were still stamping manifests, while artillery impacts vibrated through the depot walls. Brother Bacon was met by Salamanders serfs and a tech marine named Dactyr Voman, who had overseen his awakening cycle before deployment. Voman's armor was marked by furnace soot and repair oils, and his voice carried the clipped calm of one accustomed to speaking with machine spirits as often as men. He completed the final rites of activation at the edge of the landing cradle, confirming sarcophagus stability, weapon responsiveness, motive tolerance, and reactor rhythm. Brother Barkan answered each confirmation with brief acknowledgement. There was no ceremony beyond necessity. The front had no time for ceremony. The chapter detachment on world was limited. A full company had not been committed to the region. Instead, Salamander's assets were dispersed across several defensive responsibilities, most of them tied to civilian protection, evacuation support, and reinforcement of failing Imperial Guard sectors. Brother Barkan had expected this. The Salamanders were often asked to do more than destroy the enemy. They were asked to remain where human weakness became strategically inconvenient to others. It was not always efficient. It was, in his judgment, correct. His first hours planetside were spent in assessment rather than battle. He moved through the staging depot under escort, reviewing the convoy elements that would later accompany him toward Kastorel Gate. Men and women stopped working as he passed, not because they had nothing to do, but because a dreadnought changed the gravity of a place. Some stared openly. Some made the sign of the Aquila. Others looked away with the exhausted caution of soldiers who had learned not to trust symbols until the shooting started. Brother Barkan recorded their condition without sentimentality. Many of the guardsmen had been in continuous operation for too long. Their armor was dirty beyond normal field wear. Their faces showed sleep debt, dehydration, and the narrow focus common among troops who had survived too many withdrawals. Several walked with untreated minor injuries. Several more displayed the flat affect of personnel who had seen their units reduced and had not yet been given time to understand the loss. They were still functioning. That did not mean they were whole. The staging depot commander provided a compressed planetary briefing through a command node near the repair yards. The ash frontier had once served as a logistical buffer between the hive interior and the outer industrial extraction zones. It contained transit roads, armored rail branches, pipeline junctions, labor settlements, and manufactorum shells used for heavy component assembly. Its value was not symbolic. It was practical. Whoever controlled the frontier controlled movement toward the hive and the evacuation routes away from it. The Blood Pact had entered the region through a sequence of strikes that suggested advanced reconnaissance and accurate knowledge of Imperial response times. They did not simply charge the defensive line. They cut communications, struck convoy routes, seized observation points, and used artillery to separate Imperial positions from one another. Their infantry advanced behind pressure rather than noise. They tested weak points, forced withdrawals, and left enough apparent openings to draw exhausted units into exposed roads. Brother Barkan recognized the pattern quickly. The enemy was not acting like a mob gathered around heresy. It was acting like an army. During the first day, his deployment remained close to the rear line. He was used as a visible reserve while the convoy finished assembly. He stood near the central vehicle parks as engines were tested and cargo loads were redistributed. At intervals, his Vox received requests from nearby officers who wished to confirm whether he could be reassigned to their own sectors. A trench line commander wanted him near a collapsed causeway. A Medicae evacuation officer wanted him to escort ambulances moving west. An artillery liaison requested his presence at a threatened gun battery. Each request had merit. Each represented real danger. None overrode the standing order to reinforce Kastorel Gate. Brother Barkan did not find that easy. A dreadnought was not free of impulse. His body had become machine, but his judgment still carried the old instincts of a salamander. Nearby distress pulled at him. Every wounded cluster, every understrength squad, every civilian worker waiting beside a vehicle with a toolkit and no weapon became part of the moral field around him. He could not protect all of them at once. That truth did not release him from the desire to try. By late deployment cycle, the convoy received its movement authorization. The sky had darkened, though the local chronometers indicated afternoon. Ashfall thickened across the depot, reducing visibility along the exit road. Vehicle lamps glowed in muted cones against the grey air. Captain Malus Thorne moved along the infantry positions one final time, checking spacing, ammunition distribution, and casualty transport assignments. Magos Auxilia Orvan Krael oversaw filter seals and engine rights, while servitors secured cargo restraints. Procurator Halvan Rusk remained close to the command carrier, his data slate chained to his wrist. Brother Bacon took position beside the central haulers as ordered. From that point, he could see the convoy as a long, uneven body of metal and human intent. Its front elements prepared to clear obstructions. Its center carried the supplies that mattered most. Its rear guard watched the road already disappearing behind them. The formation was vulnerable because all convoys were vulnerable. It had length, noise, heat, and predictability. It could not hide its purpose. It could only move with enough discipline to make attack costly. As they departed the staging depot, Brother Bacon felt the shift from preparation to exposure. Walls fell behind them. Open industrial roads stretched ahead. The depot's layered sound faded into the lower rhythm of engines and marching boots. Distant artillery continued to speak across the frontier, but the convoy entered a quieter zone between active bombardments. That quiet did not reassure him. It marked distance from support. The first kilometers passed through abandoned worker districts, where hab blocks stood with windows shattered inward and doors hanging open. laundry lines still crossed some of the alleys, stiff beneath ash. Food stalls, transit booths, and devotional shrines remained along the roadside, each coated in grey dust. There were signs of hurried evacuation rather than orderly withdrawal. A child's red boot lay near a drainage grate. A cart of ration tins had overturned beside a checkpoint. Several civilian ground cars had been pushed off the road to clear military passage. Brother Barkan registered these details because they mattered. War was not only measured in territory, gained or lost. It was measured in ordinary objects left behind when people fled too quickly to choose what they loved. The convoy did not stop for the abandoned district. Its mission remained urgent, and no confirmed survivors were visible. Captain Thorne kept the infantry close to the vehicles, refusing to send search teams into structures that could conceal mines or observers. Brother Barkan agreed with the decision. Mercy without discipline could become another form of waste. Beyond the worker districts, the road entered a manufactorum corridor. Large structures rose on both sides, some still venting steam from damaged stacks. Conveyor bridges crossed overhead. Pipeline frames ran parallel to the road, broken in several places by shell impacts. The smell of promethium residue thickened, even through Brother Barkan's filtered sensory intake. Heat signatures flickered behind cracked walls, where fires burned inside machine halls. The convoy slowed to navigate debris, then widened again when the road cleared. It was there that Brother Barkan began to sense the full character of the planetary deployment. The world was not simply a battlefield. It was a system being dismantled. Roads were not destroyed at random. Power stations were not struck only for immediate damage. Vox relays, water junctions, bridge supports, vehicle depots, and medici corridors had all been targeted in ways that forced Imperial defenders to spend strength on survival rather than maneuver. The enemy understood logistics. That made them more dangerous than zealots who only understood slaughter. During the march, the guardsmen nearest his chassis adjusted to his presence. At first, they kept excessive distance, as if proximity alone might draw enemy fire. Later, they learned the pattern of his stride and used his mass as moving cover when the road widened. He did not correct them unless they drifted into unsafe arcs near his weapons. His external vox remained mostly silent. He listened to convoy chatter, engine reports, weather updates, and the clipped exchanges between Thorne and her squad leaders. Several times, refugees appeared at the edge of the route. Most were too far away or too frightened to approach. Some watched from collapsed doorways. Others knelt as the convoy passed, not in worship of Brother Barkan specifically, but in recognition of Imperial force still moving eastward when so much else had gone west. The convoy could not take them in without compromising speed and cargo security. That decision sat heavily across the command channel, even though no one argued it aloud. Brother Barkan marked their locations for later relay. He knew later might never come. As the deployment continued, Auspex interference increased. Ash density worsened near the outer refineries. Vox range began to contract. The convoy's connection to the staging depot weakened into broken confirmation bursts. Kastorel Gate remained ahead, distant and partially silent, transmitting only intermittent status pulses. The road between them narrowed into ruined infrastructure and blind approaches. Brother Barkan recorded the final stable hour before contact as controlled, strained, and operationally viable. The convoy was still moving. Its escort remained disciplined. Its supplies were intact. Its mission remained possible. That was the last condition he could confirm before the frontier closed around them. The first confirmed contact did not begin with a charge. Brother Barkan recorded that detail because it separated the enemy from the lesser heretic formations he had faced in other wars. The Blood Pact did not announce themselves through uncontrolled shouting or sudden devotional frenzy. They allowed the convoy to enter a prepared zone before revealing pressure. Their first action was not an infantry assault. It was silence shaped into a weapon. The road had narrowed between two broken manufactorum blocks, where conveyor bridges crossed overhead and abandoned loading towers leaned above the route. The convoy's forward vehicles slowed to pass between crater damage and a collapsed section of pipework. Visibility had fallen to less than 200 meters in the ash drift. Heat distortion from nearby refinery fires made Auspex readings unstable. Vox communication remained functional within the convoy, but long-range contact with Kastorel Gate had degraded into short fragments. Brother Barkan was positioned near the center of the column when the first warning arrived. It came from Captain Thorne's forward infantry screen. A Harricon scout reported movement inside the upper levels of the eastern manufactorum shell. The report was calm, incomplete, and cut short before confirmation. No shot followed. No scream entered the channel. Only static replaced the scout's voice. The convoy did not halt immediately. Thorne ordered the forward vehicles to maintain crawl speed, while infantry on both sides shifted into cover positions. Brother Barkan rotated his chassis toward the eastern structure and swept the broken windows with optic magnification. The building showed no obvious formation. No banners, no muzzle flashes, no massed bodies rushing through ash, only dark apertures, hanging cables, and the faint thermal smear of something recently moved behind cover. Then the second warning came from the western side. A lascutter beam, narrow and industrial, ignited beneath the road surface ahead of the lead hauler. It did not strike a vehicle. It cut through a pre-weakened support plate. The road buckled under the hauler's front axle, forcing the vehicle to stop before it sank fully into the damaged section. In the same moment, smoke charges detonated along the convoy's rear quarter, releasing black chemical vapor that rolled low across the ground and interfered with line of sight. The enemy had not opened fire in full. They had shaped the road. Brother Barkan identified the tactic as deliberate channel disruption. The Blood Pact were attempting to slow the column, split visual contact between sections, and force the escort infantry to expose themselves while checking the structures. It was a professional ambush method. It allowed the attackers to measure Imperial response before committing their main force. Captain Thorne ordered no pursuit into the buildings. Her voice remained controlled across the command channel. Forward engineers were directed to assess the road break. Infantry squads formed arcs around the immobilized lead vehicle. The rearguard tightened spacing without compressing into panic. Brother Barkan approved the response. The convoy had not yet lost discipline. The first visible Blood Pact soldier appeared on the eastern upper level 14 seconds later. He moved from shadow to firing position with practiced economy. He wore dark combat fatigues reinforced with segmented armor plates, with a grotesque iron visor covering the face. The visor was not ornamental. in the manner of undisciplined cult war gear. It was part of a uniform system, crude in appearance, but consistent across the shapes that followed. Red markings had been worked into the armor and cloth, not as random paint, but as unit signs and devotional identifiers. His weapon was a lass rifle, modified for harsh campaign use, its barrel wrapped against heat distortion and dust intrusion. Brother Barkan fired the storm bolter mounted beneath his close combat weapon before the traitor completed his aim. The burst struck the upper wall and tore the firing slit apart. Masonry, metal framing, and the body behind it disappeared into fragmentation. That single shot ended the enemy's silence. Blood Pact rifle teams opened from both manufactorum blocks. Their fire was disciplined, directed at vehicle drivers, Vox operators, exposed infantry leaders, and the engineering personnel moving toward the road break. They did not waste volume into Brother Barkan's frontal armor. They knew the limits of their weapons. Instead, they targeted the convoy's vulnerable human and logistical components. This confirmed the ambush purpose. The enemy did not need to destroy the Dreadnought first. They needed to immobilize what he protected. Brother Bacon advanced 2 steps toward the eastern structure, placing his bulk between the central haulers and the highest concentration of incoming fire. Lass rounds struck his armor in bright, brief impacts. Most failed to penetrate. Several struck damaged plates, left weakened by earlier deployment strain. Warning runes flickered, but none required immediate withdrawal. He rotated his heavy flamer upward, but withheld discharge. The range was poor, and the structure contained uncertain internal spaces. Fire used without purpose could waste fuel needed later. The Blood Pact adjusted quickly. Their rifle teams displaced after short bursts, moving from window to window rather than holding positions long enough for easy suppression. Heavy stubber fire began from the western building, angling down across the convoy's rear infantry. A launcher team appeared near a collapsed conveyor support, attempting to sight along the road toward the fuel carriers. Brother Bacon engaged the launcher team with stormbolter fire and struck the support frame beside them. The frame collapsed inward, dropping a section of rusted conveyor track into their firing point. He noted their behavior while fighting them. The Blood Pact did not break when the first positions were destroyed. They did not surge forward in rage. They adapted, withdrew several meters, and resumed fire from alternate positions. Their officers or squad leaders maintained control through signal discipline, rather than open shouting. Short Vox bursts passed between hidden teams. Hand signals were used where line of sight allowed. Even their exposed dead were ignored unless the body obstructed movement. There was no attempt to recover the fallen during active engagement. To an ordinary observer, they might have seemed fearless. Brother Barkan considered that imprecise. They were not without fear. They were conditioned to function beneath it. That made them more valuable to their dark masters and more dangerous to loyal troops already strained by fatigue. Captain Thorne's Harricon troops returned fire with measured control. Their laser guns snapped in disciplined volleys, forcing several enemy shooters away from the lower windows. Autogun rounds struck the convoy plating. Glass fragments and ash scattered across the road. The Lehman Russ tanks could not bring their main guns to bear cleanly without risking the convoy or collapsing more of the route. so their crews used hull weapons and turret discipline to suppress the upper levels. The noise became dense inside the corridor, trapped between manufactorum walls and amplified by metal structures overhead. Brother Bakken moved toward the road break, while keeping his body angled against the eastern fire. His footfalls cracked damaged ferrocrete. He assessed the cut plate and the trapped lead hauler. The road could be crossed, but not quickly, and not while the engineers were pinned. That meant the enemy's next action would likely strike the center or rear of the convoy, where hesitation could spread. He transmitted a warning to Thorn. Expect secondary contact. This engagement is incomplete. The confirmation came almost immediately. Ash movement shifted beyond the rear smoke screen. Multiple heat signatures appeared at low level, advancing through the vapor rather than firing from fixed cover. They were infantry, moving in staggered intervals along both sides of the road. Their approach remained controlled. No chanting carried through the smoke. No mad rush of bodies came howling for martyrdom. They advanced like soldiers trained to close distance under concealment. Brother Bakken turned his upper chassis toward the rear quarter. The heavy flamer came online with a pressure warning and a low growl from its damaged feed system. The first Blood Pact assault group emerged through the smoke at close range. They carried compact firearms, blades, grenades, and pole-mounted charges intended for vehicle tracks and engine housings. Their armor bore the same dark red identifiers as the rifle teams above. Some wore trophy cords and ritual marks, but those additions did not obscure the foundation of their threat. They were organized infantry with a clear objective. They intended to cripple the convoy from within its own formation. Brother Bakken stepped between them and the central supply haulers. His external vox activated at battlefield volume. "Hold behind me." The guardsman nearest him obeyed without needing the order repeated. The Dreadnought's heavy flamer discharged in a controlled sweep across the road's rear approach. Fire rolled low and hard through the smoke, illuminating the ash cloud from within and revealing the silhouettes of advancing traitors for a fraction of a second before the flame consumed the foremost rank. The weapon did not roar wildly. It delivered a precise arc of burning promethium across the approach lane, cutting the assault group away from the convoy and forcing those behind to break formation. The Blood Pact reacted by dispersing rather than fleeing. Several dropped flat behind road debris. Others moved toward the edges of the firewash, searching for blind angles. One carried a magnetic charge against his chest and continued forward despite the burning ground. Brother Bakken killed him with a single storm bolter burst before the man reached throwing distance. The first contact lasted minutes by chronometer, but Brother Bakken understood that its purpose extended beyond the immediate fight. The enemy was not merely testing weapons. They were studying response time, convoy structure, command authority, and his own damaged mobility. Somewhere beyond the visible engagement, another Blood Pact observer would be recording the Dreadnought's weapon pattern, the limits of his flamer range, the position of the fuel carriers, and the discipline of the human escort. That was the first true measure of the enemy. They did not fight only to kill. They fought to learn. The second phase of first contact confirmed that the Blood Pact had prepared more than a single ambush site. Brother Bakken understood this when the enemy began withdrawing from the manufactorum corridor without losing cohesion. Lesser forces often broke unevenly after a failed close assault. They left stragglers behind, fired without coordination, or tried to reclaim positions already compromised by return fire. The Blood Pact did none of these things. Their rifle teams reduced fire by sections. Their lower assault elements pulled back through smoke and burning ash in pairs. Their heavy weapons stopped firing only after the last mobile infantry group had moved out of the immediate kill zone. It was not retreat in the usual sense. It was repositioning. The convoy remained inside the road constriction, still delayed by the damaged surface ahead. Captain Thorne ordered the forward infantry to maintain cover while engineers worked under protection. The Harricon squads obeyed with visible restraint. They wanted to fire into every dark aperture in the manufactorum walls, but their officers controlled them. Brother Barkan noted this with approval. Fear could waste ammunition as easily as panic could waste lives. He moved toward the forward road damage, placing his chassis between the eastern structure and the engineering detail. Ash slid from his armor in sheets as he advanced. The heavy flamer's feed system returned a pressure warning after its earlier discharge. The warning remained within tolerance, but close enough to require conservation. His storm bolter counter showed inconsistent readings. Ammunition remained, but the damaged feed mechanism could not be trusted under prolonged automatic fire. The engineers reached the broken road plate under covering fire. Their assessment was quick. The lead hauler could be extracted if the convoy's recovery tractor pulled from a controlled angle. The road beneath it would not support clustered vehicles, so the column would need to pass in narrowed sequence. That meant time. Time meant exposure. Exposure meant the enemy had already achieved part of its objective. Brother Barkan sent a short acknowledgement and turned his attention outward. The manufactorum corridor offered poor visibility, but poor visibility did not mean absence. The eastern building had multiple interior routes, likely maintenance stairs, collapsed freight shafts, and overhead conveyor access. The western structure had larger openings suited for support weapons. Beyond both blocks, ruined service lanes spread into the district. The Blood Pact could disengage, circle, and attack again from another angle before the convoy fully cleared the obstruction. He scanned for command indicators. The first assault group had worn iron visors and red-marked armor common to the Blood Pact, but several carried additional black cloth wraps around the upper arms. Squad-level distinction, possibly. The launcher team had used a concealed firing position that required prior survey. The smoke charges had been placed where wind would carry the vapor across the rear approach, rather than away from it. The road cut had been executed at the exact point where heavy vehicles needed to slow. The enemy had known the convoy was coming. Whether through scouts, intercepted Vox traffic, captured personnel, or simple prediction, Brother Barkan could not yet confirm. But the ambush site had not been improvised after visual contact. It had been selected. A brief transmission passed across the convoy channel from Magos Auxilia Orvan Krail. He reported that the recovery tractor was moving forward and that filter strain across several cargo haulers had increased due to heat and ash density. He also advised that further delay would degrade engine reliability. His tone remained mechanical and precise, but the implication was direct. The convoy could win the immediate firefight and still fail if movement did not resume. Brother Bakan understood the problem. A convoy was never only a target of bullets. It was a chain of engines, drivers, fuel lines, wheels, tracks, nervous hands, and orders moving through contested space. Break one part, and the rest slowed. Slow the rest, and every enemy gun became more accurate. The Blood Pact appeared again, at longer range. This time, they did not use the upper windows. They emerged beyond the forward obstruction, across a broken loading yard, partially screened by ash and dangling pipeline sections. Their formation was wider, with rifle teams low behind scrap barricades, and a heavier weapon being dragged into position by 3 soldiers in dark armor. Brother Bacon magnified the image through damaged optics. The weapon was not a standard field piece. It appeared to be a tripod-mounted heavy stubber or captured autocannon assembly modified with crude reinforcement. Its crew moved with familiarity, not desperation. The enemy's purpose became clear. They were shifting pressure from the sides to the front, forcing the convoy to either remain blocked or push through fire. Captain Thorne saw the same development. She ordered the lead tank to angle its hull without advancing too far onto the weakened road. The Lehman Russ responded with slow precision, turret rotating toward the loading yard. Before it could fire, the Blood Pact crew opened up. Heavy rounds hammered the road and struck the tank's frontal armor in sparks and ricochets. The rounds were not sufficient to destroy the vehicle from that angle, but destruction was not required. The fire forced surrounding infantry down and interrupted the engineers connecting the recovery line. Brother Barkan stepped forward. His damaged hip actuator protested as he increased speed. The Dreadnought did not sprint. It advanced with force, each step heavy enough to shake loose dust from ruined structures. Incoming fire shifted toward him immediately. The heavy weapon crew corrected aim, walking rounds across his frontal armor. Several impacts struck the sarcophagus housing. One hit the cracked chapter marking and stripped away a line of green paint down to blackened ceramite. Warning runes flashed and stabilized. He returned fire with the Stormbolter in short, controlled bursts. The first burst struck the barricade and forced the crew low. The second destroyed the weapon's left support leg. The third hit the ammunition container beside it, scattering debris and throwing the crew away from the firing position. He did not pause to confirm individual kills. His goal was suppression and movement restoration, not personal tally. The Blood Pact rifle teams continued firing. Their marksmanship remained disciplined despite the destruction of their support weapon. Several aimed not at Barken, but at the space behind him, where engineers, drivers, and infantry moved through the narrowed passage. The traitors understood his protective instinct and attempted to shoot around it. Brother Bakan adjusted by stepping into the center of their sight line and lowering his chassis slightly, using the bulk of his armor as a shield. It was inefficient from a purely mechanical standpoint. It exposed already damaged armor to repeated fire. It increased thermal load. It reduced his own firing angle. But the convoy required protection more than he required comfort. And comfort was a category his body had surrendered long ago. The Blood Pact officer appeared only briefly. Brother Barkan identified him by posture before insignia. The man moved behind the forward rifle teams without taking a firing position of his own. He wore the same iron face covering, but his armor carried deeper red lacquer across the chest and a mantle of dark material hanging from one shoulder. A curved blade rested at his side, not drawn. He used hand motions to reposition squads and did not remain exposed longer than necessary. When the heavy weapon was destroyed, he did not display visible frustration. He redirected the nearest team toward a secondary firing line and sent another group through a service trench to the north. This was command presence under fire. It confirmed that the ambush cell still had structure. Brother Bacon marked the officer's movement and transmitted the location to Captain Thorne. Harricon sharpshooters shifted fire toward the service trench, forcing the flanking group to slow. The lead Leman Russ fired at last, its battle cannon discharge filling the corridor with pressure. The shell struck the loading yard beyond the Blood Pact position and collapsed part of the outer wall. Dust and ash swallowed the enemy firing line. For several seconds, all visual confirmation vanished. The convoy used those seconds. The recovery tractor pulled the lead hauler free with a grinding scream of stressed metal. Engineers signaled the route passable for one vehicle at a time. Thorne ordered the lead elements through, then the central supply vehicles. Drivers kept tight discipline. They did not accelerate recklessly. They did not stop to stare at the smoke. They moved at the slow pace the road allowed, which was frustrating but correct. Brother Bacon remained forward until the first cargo haulers cleared the obstruction. Enemy fire resumed from the loading yard, weaker now but still accurate. The Blood Pact had absorbed the tank shell and reformed behind deeper cover. That detail mattered. Their survivability came from preparation, not resilience alone. They had fallback positions cut into the ruins. They had studied the angles. They had accepted that the first firing line might be destroyed and prepared a second. As the convoy moved, Brother Baken's understanding of the enemy sharpened. The Blood Pact were not merely traitors with better discipline. They represented a corruption of soldierly order itself. Their obedience was real. Their courage was real. Their tactics were real. They used all the virtues of military life and bent them toward the service of ruin. That made them especially dangerous to tired, loyal soldiers, because they did not look like chaos from a distance. They looked like an army doing its work. Brother Bacon's external sensors caught movement near the collapsed conveyor bridge above the road. A small Blood Pact team had remained hidden despite the earlier exchange. They carried satchel charges, likely intended to drop onto passing vehicles from above. The angle placed them above the central haulers. He did not use the flamer. The fuel was too valuable, and the elevation made the spread unreliable. Instead, he struck the nearest bridge support with his close combat weapon. The first blow dented the frame. The second broke the weakened joint. The bridge tilted hard to one side, throwing the hidden team off balance. Harricon rifle fire cut through the exposed figures as they scrambled for footing. The remaining bridge section sagged away from the road, no longer positioned above the convoy path. The Blood Pact officer withdrew after that, not in fear and not in disorder. He understood the ambush had failed to stop the column at the first constriction. He preserved what remained of his force for later interception. His infantry followed in controlled fragments, disappearing through service lanes, broken interior passages, and ash cover. Brother Baken did not pursue. He wanted to. The desire existed as a tactical impulse and a personal one. Destroying that officer might reduce enemy coordination in the hours ahead. Clearing the nearby structures might secure the route behind them. But pursuit would pull him away from the convoy, and the convoy remained the mission. The Blood Pact had attempted to make him choose between aggression and protection. He chose protection. As the last central hauler passed the damaged section, Brother Bakken turned back toward the column. The armor across his front bore fresh impact marks. His flamer pressure remained unstable. His left actuator had worsened by a measurable but manageable margin. The convoy was moving again, and the outpost still lay ahead. The first contact had ended without resolution. The enemy had not been destroyed. They had been introduced. The convoy cleared the manufactorum corridor, but it did not leave the first contact behind. Brother Bakken understood this before the casualty reports reached him. A battlefield never ended at the edge of the smoke. It continued inside damaged engines, broken formations, interrupted command rhythms, and the silence of soldiers who had not yet reported back. The road ahead opened into a wider transit artery, bordered by storage silos, slag embankments, and half-collapsed service yards. The convoy used that temporary width to reorganize under movement. It could not afford a full halt. A halted convoy invited artillery, pursuit, and panic. It also invited accounting, and accounting was often when soldiers learned the true shape of what had happened. Captain Thorne began the assessment, while the column moved at reduced speed. Her voice remained steady, but Brother Bakken heard the change beneath it. She was no longer commanding a convoy that had avoided contact. She was commanding a convoy that had been measured, struck, and marked for further attack. The Harricon 73rd had absorbed the first losses. The forward scout team that reported movement in the eastern manufactorum failed to rejoin the column. 2 guardsmen from the engineering cover detail were confirmed dead, struck while attempting to reach the damaged road plate. 3 more were wounded badly enough to require evacuation to the medical vehicles. A rear squad had lost its Vox operator during the smokescreen assault, forcing Captain Thorne to redistribute channel discipline through runners and shorter-range squad units. The numbers were not catastrophic by Imperial standards. Brother Bakken rejected that line of thinking immediately. Imperial standards had a habit of hiding waste beneath scale. The convoy had not lost many soldiers. It had lost specific soldiers performing specific functions. That mattered more. A scout team removed from the formation reduced the column's warning distance. A Vox operator killed in the rear reduced local control when visibility collapsed. Engineers wounded during road clearance slowed future obstacle response. Every casualty weakened a system already moving below ideal strength. Brother Bakken logged each report and cross-referenced it against the convoy's remaining capabilities. The result was not failure, but it was degradation. The vehicle assessment followed. The lead hauler had been recovered, but its front axle assembly was stressed, and its steering response had become unreliable under uneven load. Orvan Krail recommended shifting part of its cargo to the next 2 transports, if time allowed. Time did not allow. Instead, the hauler was ordered to remain in the forward third of the convoy, where breakdown recovery would be easier to control. 1 Chimera-mounted command relay had taken minor external damage from heavy stubber fire, but its internal systems still functioned. A fuel carrier had suffered superficial armor, scoring only. 2 troop carriers reported filter strain above acceptable tolerance. 1 ambulance vehicle had a cracked viewing slit and damage to its left track guard, though it remained mobile. The Lehman Russ that had engaged the loading yard was intact, but its ammunition expenditure was higher than desired for so early in the route. Its commander reported 1 battle cannon shell used, several hull weapon bursts expended, and no mechanical fault beyond elevated engine temperature. Brother Barkan considered that acceptable. The tank had restored movement at the critical moment. Ammunition existed to be spent when its use preserved the mission. His own assessment was less favorable. Brother Barkan's left hip actuator had worsened during the forward advance. The compression damage from his earlier burial had not failed outright, but repeated heavy movement under fire had widened the tolerance gap. His stride remained functional, yet uneven force transfer now reduced his ability to pivot quickly. The frontal armor had absorbed multiple impacts. None penetrated the sarcophagus housing, but the cracked outer plate over his chapter marking had lost integrity along its lower edge. His storm bolter feed remained inconsistent after sustained bursts. It could fire, but not indefinitely. His heavy flamer retained fuel, though pressure instability advised shorter discharge cycles. The machine spirit remained responsive. That was enough. Brother Bacon relayed his status to Captain Thorne without embellishment. Combat capable, mobility reduced, ammunition conservation recommended. Close range denial available in limited measure. No sarcophagus breach, no withdrawal required. Thorne acknowledged and continued the convoy movement. The Medici channel carried the next layer of reality. Wounded personnel were being treated inside vehicles never designed for comfort. A guardsman with chest trauma was stabilized under restraint as the ambulance shook over broken road. 1 engineer had lost enough blood that the Medici officer requested plasma substitute from the sealed stores, then withdrew the request when reminded that the supplies were intended for Kastorel Gate. Brother Bacon heard the exchange and understood the conflict. To use the stores now was to preserve a life presently in reach. To preserve the stores was to increase survival for many more at the outpost. The Medici officer used the plasma substitute anyway. No one corrected him. Brother Bacon did not either. The convoy continued across the transit artery for another several kilometers before reaching a secondary control point marked on the route map. The location had once regulated cargo flow between the manufactorum district and the outer refinery fields. It contained a gatehouse, vehicle scales, abandoned security booths, and a low bunker built into the side of a slag rise. The site should have been occupied by Imperial rear observers. It was empty. Captain Thorne ordered a rolling security sweep rather than a full stop. Harricon infantry moved through the visible structures while the convoy maintained crawl speed. No living enemy was found. No loyal personnel answered. The bunker showed signs of hurried evacuation, including discarded ration wrappers, a broken field receiver, and dried blood near the entrance. There were no bodies. That absence gave the place a colder meaning than corpses would have. Bodies confirmed an event. Absence suggested removal. Inside the gatehouse, the infantry found a wall map marked with charcoal lines. Several route segments had been crossed out. One marking circled Kastorel Gate. Another marked the convoy's current path. The style was crude, but the information was accurate enough to matter. Brother Barken reviewed the pict feed transmitted from Thorn's squad leader and reached the only responsible conclusion. The Blood Pact had either occupied the control point earlier or received information from someone who had. The convoy's movement was compromised. This changed the mission from reinforcement to contested breakthrough. Kastorel Gate still required the supplies. That objective had not changed. What changed was the probability that every major road between the convoy and the outpost had already been watched, trapped, or ranged by enemy observers. Brother Barken recommended deviation from the primary route. Orvan Krail objected on mechanical grounds. The alternate industrial service roads were narrower, partially collapsed, and more likely to damage the heavier cargo vehicles. Captain Thorn requested a probability estimate. Krail offered none with confidence. Procurator Rusk insisted that the authorized route remained the only one approved for convoy movement. His statement held no tactical value. Brother Barken ignored it. The ancient warrior reviewed the available pathing through broken map data and partial Auspex returns. The primary route was faster, but predictable. The western service road was unstable, but offered more cover from long-range fire. The refinery bypass added distance, but reduced exposure to prepared urban ambush sites. None were safe. Safe had ceased to be relevant. The correct choice was the path that preserved the mission's chance of arrival. Brother Barken advised a controlled shift onto the refinery bypass after the next junction. The convoy would lose time, but the Blood Pact had demonstrated enough preparation along the main route that speed alone might deliver the column into a stronger kill zone. Captain Thorn accepted the recommendation. Krail adjusted vehicle order to place the most mechanically vulnerable transports away from the worst expected road surfaces. The damaged lead hauler was moved inward within the formation, no longer trusted to handle sudden obstruction at the front. The mission objective was restated across the convoy channel. Kastorel Gate remained the destination. The convoy was to deliver generator cores, promethium, Vox components, medical supplies, purification cartridges, and ammunition. The outpost's survival mattered because it held the eastern withdrawal corridor and sheltered loyal personnel who could not survive an open retreat through enemy-held territory. No pursuit into enemy-held structures was authorized unless necessary for immediate route clearance. No vehicle was to be abandoned unless recovery became impossible under direct threat. No civilian technician was to be exposed outside armored cover without infantry protection. No wounded soldier capable of holding a weapon was to be removed from defensive readiness unless ordered by military authority. Brother Barken added his own directive after Thorn finished. The enemy has learned our shape. We must now deny them our pattern. The convoy turned toward the refinery bypass under thickening ash. Behind them, the manufactorum corridor faded into smoke, firelight, and the dead who could not be recovered without losing the living still under their protection. Brother Barken did not mark them as forgotten. He marked them as carried forward in duty. Their loss had purchased movement, warning, and understanding. The column had been damaged. The supplies remained mostly intact. The mission was still alive? The execution of the primary mission objective began when the convoy stopped behaving like a relief column and began operating as a mobile defensive position. Brother Barkan identified the transition after the turn onto the refinery bypass. The original order had described delivery. The battlefield required forced passage. Those were not the same action. Delivery assumed a destination that could be reached by persistence and protection. Forced passage assumed an enemy already shaping the route, measuring the convoy's limitations, and preparing to spend lives to prevent arrival. Once that distinction became clear, every decision inside the column had to serve a narrower purpose. The convoy no longer needed to preserve ideal formation, procedural comfort, or rear-line administrative order. It needed to remain coherent long enough to carry its cargo into Kastorel Gate. The refinery bypass ran along the edge of the outer Prometheum extraction yards, where pipeline spines crossed the ash flats on elevated brackets, and storage tanks rose from the grey landscape like blunt industrial towers. The road surface had not been maintained for heavy military traffic. It was cracked by subsidence, slick with chemical residue, and partially buried under drifting ash. In places, the convoy had to move single file between collapsed utility gantries and abandoned maintenance structures. Every narrowing point created risk. Every delay created a window for the Blood Pact to correct their pursuit. Brother Barkan remained near the center of the column, but his role had changed. He was no longer only a counter-assault asset. He became the convoy's moving anchor. Captain Thorne shifted her infantry pattern around him, using his chassis as the reference point for spacing and response. The Lehman Russ tanks alternated forward and rearward cover depending on terrain. Orvan Krail redistributed engine sears between the most valuable haulers, prioritizing generator cores, Prometheum, Vox components, and water purification cartridges. Procurator Rusk protested the disorder in the manifest sequence until Thorne ordered him to remain inside the command carrier and stop interfering with survival decisions. Brother Bacon did not comment on the exchange. The convoy had no spare attention for wounded pride. The first stage of execution was cargo preservation. The primary objective could not be measured by how many vehicles crossed the distance. It had to be measured by which loads survived. Brother Bacon reviewed the cargo designation codes through the command channel and ranked the supplies by outpost need. Generator cores were critical because Kastorel Gate's power grid was failing. Vox components were critical because the outpost could not coordinate withdrawal or request support without reliable communication. Purification cartridges were critical because a fortified position without water became a delayed grave. Medical supplies were critical because the garrison already held more wounded than its current stock could support. Ammunition remained necessary, but if forced to choose, water and power would extend the outpost's endurance more reliably than another crate of lasgun charge packs. This assessment changed the convoy's internal order. Less essential munitions were shifted toward vehicles that could be abandoned if absolutely required. Technical personnel were moved closer to the generator transports. Fuel carriers were spaced farther apart to prevent a single strike from creating a chain detonation. The damaged hauler from the manufactorum ambush was lightened by transferring part of its load during a rolling pause behind a refinery wall. The transfer was imperfect, rushed, and dangerous, but it prevented the vehicle from becoming a predictable failure point. Brother Barkan watched the work through ash and low light. The humans moved with the particular efficiency of exhausted personnel who had stopped expecting comfort. They carried crates through chemical dust, passed tools between vehicles, dragged wounded men away from exposed hatches, and kept glancing toward the grey horizon where the enemy might return. None of them looked heroic in the manner of statues. They looked cold, afraid, dirty, and functional. That was often the more reliable form of courage. The second stage of execution was communication restoration. Kastorel Gate still transmitted intermittent pulses, but the signal had degraded further after the route deviation. Orvan Krail proposed using one of the replacement Vox arrays as a temporary relay, mounted onto the command carrier and powered from a portable generator. It would risk damaging equipment intended for the outpost, but without stronger communication, the convoy might arrive at sealed gates or enter an artillery box without warning. Captain Thorn asked Brother Barkan for judgment. He approved the risk. A sealed component could save the outpost later. A working relay could save the convoy now. And without the convoy, the sealed component would never matter. Krail's attendants mounted the array while the column advanced at reduced speed along a pipeline service road. The work required one engine seer to climb onto the carrier roof, while two servitors stabilized the frame. Blood Pact rifle fire had not yet resumed, but the possibility remained constant. Brother Barkan positioned himself beside the carrier, close enough to shield the roof crew from the most likely firing angles. The temporary relay came online, with a burst of static strong enough to overload one of the lesser channels. Kastorel Gate answered after several attempts. The voice that emerged was distorted, strained, and partially buried beneath interference, but it was loyal. The outpost identified itself under emergency authentication and requested convoy status. Captain Thorn reported movement, damage, altered route, and estimated arrival delay. She did not soften the facts. The convoy was reduced, but mobile. Enemy contact confirmed Blood Pact. Supplies remained mostly intact. The outpost was instructed to prepare for emergency intake and possible contact at the outer perimeter. The reply from Kastorel Gate confirmed the mission's urgency. The outpost had suffered repeated probing attacks through the eastern service trenches. Its reserve generator was failing. Water rationing had become severe. Ammunition remained available, but unevenly distributed. Civilian personnel were sheltering below the main transit platforms. The command staff could not guarantee that the Eastern Gate mechanism would remain powered beyond the next cycle, unless a generator core arrived. Brother Bacon absorbed the information without visible reaction. The primary objective narrowed again. It was no longer only to reach Kastorel Gate. It was to reach the outpost before its power failure turned the gate, the Medici shelters, and the lower filtration pumps into dead infrastructure. The third stage of execution was route denial. If the Blood Pact had learned the convoy's shape, then the convoy had to make pursuit costly. Brother Barkan ordered the rear guard to leave controlled obstructions at selected points, rather than attempting to erase all evidence of passage. Broken cargo pallets, damaged fencing, and collapsed maintenance frames were positioned to slow light vehicles, but not block the convoy's own retreat if forced backward. Krail objected to the term retreat, then accepted the utility of the action. Captain Thorn assigned 2 squads to the work during short movement pauses. Brother Barkan used his close combat weapon to bring down a weakened pipeline bracket after the last fuel carrier passed beneath it. The fallen structure blocked a direct lane across the bypass and forced any pursuing vehicle to detour around a chemical drainage trench. He did not know whether the obstruction would delay the Blood Pact by minutes or only seconds. Seconds had value. Seconds could decide whether a gate opened, whether a wounded engineer finished connecting a power cable, or whether a guardsman reloaded before the enemy reached him. The Blood Pact returned near the refinery pump fields. This time, they did not attempt a fixed ambush. They used pursuit pressure. Small teams appeared along parallel service lanes, firing at the convoy from oblique angles before withdrawing behind tanks and pump housings. Their goal was not immediate destruction. They wanted the convoy to slow, compress, and lose its spacing. They targeted tires, track guards, exposed infantry, and the temporary Vox relay. They had learned from the first engagement. Brother Barkan responded by refusing to be drawn away. When a Blood Pact team fired from the left flank, he did not pursue them into the refinery structures. He fired only enough to suppress, then returned to the convoy's center line. When another group attempted to approach the generator transports from a drainage cut, he used a short flamer burst to seal the approach and ordered the nearest Harricon squad to hold fire until silhouettes crossed the flame light. The enemy wanted the Dreadnought to overextend. He denied them the pattern. Captain Thorne's infantry adapted as well. They no longer fired at every movement. They protected assigned vehicles. They used short volleys, then displaced. The Lehman Russ crews began using their bulk to block long sight lines, rather than seeking decisive shots. Even the wounded who remained conscious inside the troop carriers were positioned near firing slits to cover close approaches. The convoy became slower, but more deliberate. It no longer moved like a line trying not to be hit. It moved like a damaged animal that had learned where its teeth still were. The execution of the objective reached its critical phase when Kastorel Gate transmitted final approach coordinates through the unstable relay. The outpost could open the eastern gate for a limited interval if the convoy reached the approach road before the failing generator dropped below threshold. The window was measured in minutes, not hours. If the convoy missed it, the gate could still be opened manually, but only from the exterior control house. That control house was exposed to enemy fire and likely already ranged by Blood Pact observers. Brother Barkan understood what that meant. The convoy could not arrive cautiously. It had to arrive intact enough and fast enough to pass through a gate that might not open twice. He transmitted to all channels. Primary objective remains within reach. Maintain movement. Protect the generator haulers. Protect the relay. Ignore all targets that do not threaten passage. The order stripped the battlefield down to its core. Enemy bodies no longer mattered. Territory no longer mattered. Vengeance did not matter. The convoy's losses did not become meaningless, but they could not be allowed to command the next decision. The objective was survival through delivery. Ahead, the terrain began to rise toward the transit ridge that led to Kastorel Gate. Through ash and smoke, Brother Barkan's optics caught the first broken outline of the outpost's outer wall. It was distant, dark, and partially obscured by bombardment haze. Its signal beacon flickered weakly against the interference. Behind the convoy, Blood Pact pursuit elements continued to close. Brother Bakken advanced with the central vehicles, damaged stride steady, reactor heat climbing, weapons held ready. He no longer calculated the mission in terms of distance alone. He calculated it in power remaining, ammunition remaining, minutes remaining, and the number of loyal lives still moving because the column had not stopped. The objective had not yet been secured, but it was close enough to fight for directly. The route to extraction became a measurement of what could still move. Brother Bakken no longer judged the convoy by its original strength. That version of the column had ended somewhere behind them, in the manufactorum corridor and along the refinery bypass, where discipline had survived, but certainty had not. What remained was smaller in capability than the departure manifest suggested, yet still intact in the ways that mattered most. The generator haulers continued forward. The temporary Vox relay still functioned. The Promethium carrier, assigned to Kastorel Gate's emergency power feed, remained mobile. The water purification cartridges were still inside armored transport. The Medici stores had been reduced by field use, but enough remained to justify the convoy's continued risk. Distance had become the least honest number in the mission. Kastorel Gate was close by map scale, but the final approach road passed through exposed transit ground below the outpost ridge. The terrain no longer offered the broken cover of manufactorum walls or refinery tanks. It opened into a broad service causeway lined with shattered cargo pylons, disabled rail loaders, and drainage culverts half filled with ash. The outpost wall stood ahead, dark and incomplete through smoke. Its eastern gate beacon flickered in irregular intervals. Each flicker confirmed that power still existed. Each gap between flickers suggested it might fail before the convoy arrived. Captain Thorne requested an updated time estimate from Orvan Krail. The answer came after a delay of several seconds. At current speed, with no further obstruction, the convoy would reach the outer approach in under 20 minutes. The gate window could not be guaranteed beyond 12. If the column increased speed, the damaged hauler and one troop carrier risked mechanical failure. If the column maintained present speed, the gate might lose power before the generator cores arrived. Brother Bakken processed the answer against the convoy's physical condition. The choice was not between safe and unsafe. It was between different types of loss. A cautious approach could preserve vehicles that might then arrive too late. A forced approach could break weaker vehicles, but deliver the critical loads in time. The objective had already been refined to cargo survival and outpost restoration. Vehicles carrying lesser supplies could no longer dictate pace. He transmitted his recommendation. Advance priority vehicles. Secondary transports follow if able. Captain Thorne accepted without argument. The convoy reformed under movement. The generator haulers, Promethium carrier, Vox relay command carrier, and one Medici transport moved into the forward group. The Lehman Russ tanks positioned to shield the flanks as best as the road width allowed. Damaged vehicles and lower priority ammunition carriers fell into the rear group, still protected, but no longer allowed to slow the mission core. The separation was not spoken of as abandonment. It was not yet that. But every soldier understood what the new formation meant. If the Blood Pact struck again, the forward group would not turn back unless the critical cargo was directly threatened. The rear group would have to keep moving or hold long enough for the rest to pass. Brother Bakken remained between the two groups at first, then shifted forward when enemy pursuit intensified. The Blood Pact appeared along the causeway edges in greater number than before. They had abandoned subtle probing and begun a converging pursuit. Rifle teams moved through drainage trenches. Light vehicles advanced behind ash cover along a parallel service track. A captured Imperial utility carrier, marked over with dark red symbols, emerged from behind a broken rail loader and attempted to angle toward the convoy's rear. Its mounted weapon opened fire in short bursts, testing range before committing fully. The rear Lehman Russ answered with its hull weapon and forced the carrier behind cover, but the exchange cost momentum. The rear group slowed. Brother Bakken did not turn back. He marked the threat, transmitted its position, and continued with the priority vehicles. The decision carried weight, but not uncertainty. The mission could no longer be protected as a single body. It had to be protected by function. His own handicaps were worsening. The left hip actuator had moved from degraded response to intermittent resistance. Each step required correction from the stabilizing systems. The Dreadnought's stride became heavier, less fluid, and more punishing to the road beneath him. Reactor heat rose as the motive system compensated. The sarcophagus remained stable, but internal alerts increased in frequency. His frontal armor held, though repeated impacts had weakened several plates around the torso housing. The storm bolter feed jammed twice during the advance, each time clearing after short mechanical cycling. The heavy flamer retained enough fuel for limited use, but pressure instability meant a long discharge might fail when needed most. Brother Bakken adjusted tactics accordingly. He stopped using weapons to answer every visible threat. He conserved fire for threats that could halt the priority vehicles. Rifle teams at poor angles were ignored unless they approached within effective range. Blood Pact infantry moving toward the generator haulers was suppressed immediately. Any threat to the Vox relay was answered with force. Every other decision was subordinated to time. The supplies were now being consumed by the act of saving them. Fuel expenditure increased as drivers forced damaged engines beyond ideal thresholds. Medici supplies continued to decrease inside the forward ambulance as wounded personnel were stabilized during movement. Water reserves were not opened, despite multiple requests from overheated soldiers, because the purification cartridges had to arrive sealed and accounted for. Ammunition across the Harricon squads was uneven. Some guardsmen carried full charge packs taken from the dead. Others were down to partial cells and sidearms. Thorn ordered redistribution only where it could be done without slowing the column. The temporary Vox relay began to fail under vibration and incoming fire. One support brace had loosened. The array tilted against its mounting and produced static bursts that cut across command traffic. Orvan Krail sent an engine seer onto the carrier roof again, while the vehicle remained in motion. The engine seer crawled across the plating under ash and lass fire, secured by a cable around the waist. Brother Bakken moved beside the carrier, keeping his armor between the engine seer and the causeway trench. A Blood Pact marksman fired from a drainage culvert ahead. The shot struck the relay frame rather than the engine seer, but the impact split one of the exposed connectors. The signal dropped immediately. Kastorel Gate vanished into static. Krail's voice sharpened for the first time as he ordered manual reconnection. The engine seer remained on the roof, hands working through the damaged assembly, while the carrier bounced over fractured road. Brother Bakken fired one short storm bolter, burst into the culvert mouth. The weapon jammed after the burst. He did not waste time clearing it. He angled his chassis, lowered his center of mass, and used his body as moving cover until the engine seer completed the repair. The relay returned in broken fragments. Kastorel Gate's signal reappeared, weaker than before. The outpost reported that the eastern gate was cycling open. The window had begun. Time changed after that message. It was no longer a projection. It was an active loss. Each second spent under fire was a second of gate power draining away. Each vehicle hesitation became measurable danger. The forward group increased speed beyond previous tolerance. The generator haulers shook violently on their suspensions. One driver reported steering drift and was ordered to correct manually. The Prometheum carrier's engine temperature exceeded safe operation. Krail overrode the warning and instructed the driver to maintain pace. Blood Pact pursuit intensified in response. They understood the same timing, even if they did not hear the same Vox traffic. Their fire shifted toward the lead vehicles. A rocket streaked from the right side of the causeway and struck the road ahead of the first generator hauler, blasting a shallow crater into the surface. The driver swerved hard but kept moving. Brother Bakken identified the firing point and turned his heavy flamer toward it, then stopped before discharge. The range was too far, and the weapon could not afford waste. Instead, he charged. The movement strained his damaged actuator almost beyond tolerance. Warning runes flooded his sight. His chassis lurched once, corrected, and continued forward with brutal momentum. The Blood Pact rocket team attempted to relocate after firing, but the ash and debris slowed them. Brother Bakken crossed the distance in time to bring his close combat weapon down against the cover they occupied. The impact crushed the barricade, the launcher, and the firing team beneath it. He did not remain to finish what was already destroyed. He turned back toward the convoy and resumed his place beside the priority vehicles. That charge cost him. The left actuator partially seized afterward. His stride shortened. His upper chassis compensated by rotating more slowly. Reactor heat rose again. He became less able to respond to threats outside his forward arc. Captain Thorne noticed and reassigned 2 Hurricane squads to cover his damaged side. The gesture was tactically correct and personally significant, though neither she nor Brother Bacon named it as such. The humans were now protecting the dreadnought that had protected them. The final stretch to Kastorel Gate came into view as the ash thinned under wind moving down from the ridge. The eastern gate stood partially open, wide enough for one vehicle at a time. Emergency lamps glowed along the inner wall. Imperial defenders fired from parapets and lower firing slits, engaging Blood Pact elements approaching from the outer trenches. The outpost was alive, but under pressure. The convoy's forward group entered the approach lane. Brother Bakken transmitted his final instruction before crossing into the gate's shadow. Critical cargo first, wounded second. Combat vehicles hold the mouth until passage is complete. He did not know whether he would be inside the gate when it closed. That was no longer the deciding factor. The supplies were within reach. The civilians and wounded still moving behind him had not been left to die on the road. The Blood Pact had spent men, ammunition, and time trying to prevent a single truth from reaching Kastorel Gate. The Imperium had returned for its own. Brother Bakken planted his damaged chassis at the gate approach and turned to face the enemy, while the first generator hauler passed behind him. Extraction did not occur as a clean withdrawal. Brother Bakken recorded it as a controlled compression under direct threat. The eastern gate of Kastorel Gate remained open, but only partially, and the failing power system forced every vehicle to pass through a narrow entry channel one at a time. The first generator hauler crossed the threshold with its engine coughing black exhaust into the gate tunnel. The second followed close behind, its driver keeping less than a vehicle length of distance, despite the risk of collision. The Prometheum carrier entered third, escorted by infantry running beside its armored wheels, with weapons raised toward the outer trenches. The gate mechanism shook each time it attempted to hold position. Emergency pistons strained against their housings. Sparks fell from the upper track. The outpost's defenders had reinforced the opening with manual clamps and external braces, but those measures only slowed the failure. The gate was not truly open. It was being forced to remain open by men, machines, and a power grid already near collapse. Brother Bakken stood outside the gate mouth, while the priority vehicles passed behind him. The Blood Pact advanced across the approach road in dispersed groups, using smoke, wreckage, and drainage cuts to reduce exposure from the outpost walls. Their pursuit had lost subtlety, but not discipline. They understood the moment. If they could halt one vehicle in the entry lane, the convoy would compress. If they could destroy the gate mechanism, the remaining transports would be trapped outside. If they could bring down the Dreadnought, the psychological center of the withdrawal would break at the threshold. Their first assault against the gate came from the left trench line. A squad moved low through ash and broken ferrocrete, carrying satchel charges and short-range weapons. Brother Bakken could not pivot quickly enough to face them with full efficiency. His left actuator dragged against every correction. Captain Thorne's Harricon guardsmen filled the gap. They formed along the gate approach, firing controlled volleys into the trench line while falling back by steps. Their fire did not stop the entire enemy squad, but it slowed them long enough for Brother Bakken to bring his heavy flamer to bear. He used the weapon in a short burst, no longer than necessary. Prometheum washed across the trench mouth and forced the attackers into the open. The outpost defenders finished the rest from the wall. The flamer pressure dropped after the burst and did not fully recover. Brother Bakken marked the weapon as unreliable. He did not attempt to cycle it again. The rear group reached the approach under fire several minutes later. It arrived in broken order, but not en route. The damaged hauler limped forward with its steering assembly, nearly failed. One troop carrier followed with smoke pouring from its engine vents. The rear Lehman Russ moved last, turret traversing slowly as it covered the causeway behind them. Blood Pact fire struck the tank repeatedly, but its crew held position long enough for the lesser vehicles to close on the gate. Inside the entry tunnel, Kastorel Gate personnel began unloading the first generator core before the hauler had fully stopped. Mechanicus attendants from the convoy joined the outpost's engine seers without formal greeting. Cables were dragged across the floor. Power couplings were opened. Laborers and wounded soldiers carried crates by hand, because there was no time to wait for loading equipment. The mission objective had crossed the wall, but it was not yet secured. Supplies inside a gate were still only cargo until connected, distributed, and used. Brother Bacon remained outside until the last Medici transport entered. Captain Thorne ordered him through next. He did not comply immediately. His optics tracked the rear Leman Russ, still reversing under fire toward the gate lane. The tank's hull bore fresh impact marks. Its engine note had become uneven. Blood Pact infantry were attempting to close from both sides with charges. If the tank was disabled in the lane, nothing behind it would pass. Brother Bacon advanced out from the gate mouth to meet the attackers. His damaged actuator seized after the third step. The dreadnought tilted hard to the left, recovered through brute mechanical correction, and continued forward in a shorter, grinding stride. He fired the storm bolter once. The weapon jammed immediately. No time remained to clear it. He used the close combat weapon instead, smashing the first charging traitor aside and driving his armored bulk between the tank and the nearest assault team. The Leman Russ reversed past him into the gate lane. Its commander transmitted a brief acknowledgement, distorted by static and engine strain. Brother Bacon did not answer. He was already turning back toward the enemy. The Blood Pact officer from the earlier ambush appeared among the advancing soldiers at the edge of the approach. His red-marked armor was scored and dust-covered, but his command posture remained intact. He raised one hand, and the nearest traitors shifted from pursuit into firing positions. They were not trying to rush the gate anymore. They were preparing to concentrate fire on Brother Bacon before he could withdraw. Kastorel Gate's warning klaxon sounded behind him. The gate was closing. Captain Thorne called his name over the vox. Her order was direct. Withdraw. Brother Bacon began moving backward, not from self-preservation, but because remaining outside after the convoy's entry would serve no further mission purpose. The outpost needed his firepower inside the wall if another assault followed. Yet his movement was slow, too slow. The Blood Pact fired as one. Lass fire, solid rounds, and explosive impacts struck his front armor. The cracked plate over his sarcophagus housing fractured further. His left leg locked for a full second. Reactor heat spiked. Internal systems attempted to compensate and failed, then corrected through emergency routing. Brother Bacon remained upright. He took one step back, then another. Harricon guardsmen emerged from the gate tunnel against orders and fired past him. Captain Thorne was among them. Their fire disrupted the enemy concentration long enough for Brother Bacon to reach the threshold. The gate descended behind his upper chassis as he crossed. Outpost personnel shouted warnings. Servo motors screamed. The dreadnought's rear armor scraped against the closing mechanism as he forced himself inside. The gate sealed with a final impact that shook dust from the tunnel roof. For several seconds, there was no speech. Only alarms, engine noise, wounded breathing, and the distant hammer of enemy fire against the exterior wall. Brother Bacon remained standing until the final vehicle cleared the tunnel. Then his left leg failed completely. His chassis dropped to one knee with enough force to crack the floor plating. Tech adepts moved toward him at once, but he ordered them first to attend the generator transfer. The sarcophagus remained stable. The outpost did not. Kastorel Gate's emergency power returned in stages. The first generator core restored the eastern gate lock. The second stabilized the medici shelters and lower filtration pumps. The replacement Vox components allowed the outpost to re-establish partial long-range transmission to surviving Imperial command elements. Water purification resumed at reduced capacity within the hour. Ammunition crates were distributed to the wall sectors under renewed attack. The convoy had not arrived whole, but it had arrived with the materials that mattered. The debriefing began before repairs to Brother Barkan were complete. He remained in a maintenance alcove near the lower transit bay, surrounded by heat haze, diagnostic cables, and kneeling engine sears. His left actuator was locked open for emergency repair. The heavy flamer assembly was drained and marked for replacement. The storm bolter feed had been removed from its housing. His frontal armor was cracked, scorched, and pitted. The chapter icon remained visible only in broken sections. Captain Thorne gave the first spoken report. She confirmed the convoy's departure strength, enemy contact points, route deviation, casualty figures, cargo preservation, and successful delivery of critical supplies. Her voice was hoarse from smoke and command strain. She did not exaggerate the victory. She did not conceal the losses. She stated that without Brother Barkan's intervention, the convoy would likely have failed before reaching the refinery bypass. Brother Barkan corrected the record. He stated that the convoy survived because command discipline held, because the engineers worked under fire, because the drivers maintained movement, because the wounded continued to fight when ordered, and because Kastorel Gate held its gate open beyond safe mechanical tolerance. His own role was recorded as armored escort and close defense. Essential, but not solitary. The outpost commander requested his assessment of the Blood Pact force. Brother Barkan described them as disciplined, informed, adaptive, and focused on logistical disruption rather than simple annihilation. He noted their use of prepared ambush points, pursuit pressure, command control, and selective targeting. He further stated that the enemy had attempted to stop more than supplies. They had attempted to prevent proof of Imperial recovery from reaching a collapsing position. When asked to clarify, Brother Barkan's answer was brief. The abandoned were not abandoned. That statement entered the final transcript. By the end of the debrief, Kastorel Gate remained under threat, but no longer at immediate risk of internal collapse. Its power grid was weak but functioning. Its wounded were being treated. Its Vox was alive. Its defenders knew that command had not reached them in full strength, but something had reached them. A damaged convoy, a reduced escort, a wounded captain. A living dreadnought of the Salamanders, who had crossed nearly 80 kilometers of enemy-held ruin, rather than leave loyal souls to die unseen. Brother Barkan did not describe the action as heroic. He described it as completion of duty under degraded conditions. The distinction mattered to him. Heroism could be admired from a distance. Duty had to be repeated when admiration ended.